I work at a small marketing firm downtown, nothing glamorous, but it keeps me busy enough that I usually don't get home until around 7 in the evening. Last Tuesday was different though. I had wrapped up early and decided to treat myself to some Chinese takeout on the way home. The delivery guy from the building next door was just leaving as I walked up to my apartment complex, and he mentioned there was a package waiting for me by my door. That struck me as odd because I hadn't ordered anything recently. My online shopping habits are pretty predictable. I usually go on sprees every few months, but I'd been trying to save money lately. Still, I figured maybe I'd forgotten about something I'd ordered weeks ago. The package was sitting there, plain brown cardboard, about the size of a shoebox. My name and address were written in neat handwriting across the top, but there was no return address. What really caught my attention was the postmark. It was from 3 days ago, sent from a post office about 20 miles from here. I brought it inside and set it on my kitchen counter while I unpacked my dinner. The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. It had this old-fashioned quality to it, like someone who learned cursive in school and never stopped using it. My grandmother used to write like that. After eating, I finally opened the package. Inside was a small wooden jewelry box, the kind you might find at an antique store. It was beautiful, with intricate carvings along the edges and a tiny brass clasp. Underneath the box was a folded piece of paper. The note was written in the same handwriting as the address. It read, "Yulita, I wanted you to have this. It belonged to my mother, and I always thought you'd appreciate it more than anyone else. I hope you're doing well. Love, Mrs. Jace." Mrs. Jace, the name hit me like a truck. She was my elderly neighbor from when I was a kid, back when my family lived in Millbrook. She used to give me cookies when I walked past her house on the way to school, and she'd always ask about my grades and whether I was being good for my parents. I probably hadn't thought about her in 10 years. But here's the thing that made my hands start shaking as I held that note. Mrs. Jace died 4 years ago. I remember because my mom called to tell me about the funeral. She'd had a stroke and passed away quietly in her sleep. I called my mom immediately. She confirmed what I already knew. Mrs. Jace had been dead for years. My mom even remembered going to her funeral, said it was a lovely service, and that Mrs. Jace had left most of her belongings to various neighbors and friends. I spent the next hour trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone else had sent it as a prank, though that seemed incredibly elaborate and cruel. Maybe there was another Mrs. Jace, though the note clearly referenced our old neighborhood and seemed to know personal details about me. The jewelry box itself was even more unsettling. When I opened it, there was a small silver locket inside, tarnished with age. The locket opened to reveal a tiny photograph of a young woman I didn't recognize, probably from the 1940s or 1950s based on the hairstyle and clothing. I tried researching the postmark, calling the post office to see if they had any record of who sent it. They told me they couldn't provide that information without a police report. But what would I tell the police? That a dead woman sent me a package? They'd think I was losing my mind. The strangest part is that I've been wearing the locket ever since. I can't explain why, but it feels important somehow. Like Mrs. Jace really did want me to have it, even though that's impossible. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if she had arranged for someone to send it after her death, like she'd planned it years in advance. But the timing seems too coincidental, and the handwriting looked fresh, not like something that had been sitting in an envelope for 4 years. I still have the package and the note. I've thought about throwing them away, but I can't bring myself to do it. Part of me is hoping I'll figure out the explanation eventually, that there's some logical reason for all of this. But deep down, I think Mrs. Jace wanted me to remember her. And now, every time I touch this locket, I do. I travel for work about once a month, usually to small cities where the hotel options are either overpriced chains or sketchy motels that look like they haven't been updated since the 1980s. That's why I started using Airbnb. You can usually find a decent place that's clean and affordable. Plus, you get to stay in actual neighborhoods instead of being stuck near the highway. Last month, I had a conference in Portland, Oregon. I found this cute little apartment about 15 minutes from downtown, hosted by someone named Milo, who had great reviews and over 200 positive comments. The place looked perfect in the photos: hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, modern kitchen. Milo messaged me before my arrival to let me know he'd leave the key in a lockbox and that I should make myself at home. The apartment was exactly as advertised when I arrived Thursday evening. Clean, stylish, with all the amenities I needed. Milo had left a bottle of wine on the counter with a welcome note, along with recommendations for local restaurants. Everything seemed normal and I was impressed by the attention to detail. Friday morning, I had an early presentation, so I got up around 6 to shower and get ready. The bathroom was small but nicely renovated, with white subway tiles and one of those rainfall shower heads. As I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something that seemed a little off. There was a small black device plugged into the wall outlet next to the mirror. It looked like a phone charger, but there was no cord attached to it. Just a small black cube with what looked like a tiny LED light on the front. I figured maybe it was some kind of nightlight or air freshener, though it seemed oddly placed. I didn't think much about it until I was drying off after my shower. The light on the device had changed from green to red, and I could swear I saw it blink once. That's when I started to get suspicious. I've always been somewhat paranoid about hidden cameras. You hear stories about them being found in hotels and rental properties, usually in smoke detectors or alarm clocks, but I'd never actually encountered one myself. Still, something about this device was bothering me. After my conference sessions ended that afternoon, I came back to the apartment and decided to investigate. I unplugged the device and examined it more closely. On the back, in tiny print, I could make out part of a model number. When I looked it up online, my stomach dropped. It was a spy camera designed to look like a USB charger. According to the product description, it could record HD video and had motion detection capabilities. The reviews were full of people talking about using them to monitor their homes while they were away, but there were also some comments that made my skin crawl, people discussing how to hide them in bathrooms and bedrooms. I immediately started checking the rest of the apartment. I looked in every room, behind picture frames, inside smoke detectors, anywhere a camera might be hidden. I didn't find any others, but that didn't make me feel much better. The worst part was realizing that I'd been staying there for 2 days already. I'd showered, changed clothes, done all the things you do in private when you think you're alone. The thought that someone might have been watching, possibly recording, made me feel sick. I documented everything with photos and immediately reported it to Airbnb. I also filed a police report, though the officer I spoke with said, "These cases are difficult to prosecute unless you can prove the recordings were actually being used for illegal purposes." Airbnb was surprisingly responsive. They removed Milo's listing within 24 hours and refunded my stay completely. They also connected me with a specialist who helped me understand what steps to take to protect myself legally. The scariest part is that Milo had been hosting for over 3 years. His profile showed hundreds of guests, mostly women traveling alone for business. I can't stop wondering how many other people were recorded without their knowledge. I still use Airbnb when I travel, but now I spend the first 30 minutes of every stay doing a thorough sweep of the property. I've bought one of those RF detectors that can pick up hidden cameras and recording devices. It might seem paranoid, but after finding that camera, I'd rather be safe. I never heard back from Milo directly, and his profile disappeared completely after Airbnb took action. Sometimes I wonder if he knew I'd found it, if he was watching somehow when I discovered the camera. The thought still gives me chills. I've started warning other women I know who travel frequently. Most people don't realize how common this is becoming, or how easy it is to buy these devices online. What happened to me could happen to anyone. I've always been a heavy sleeper. My roommate in college used to joke that she could throw a party in our dorm room and I'd sleep right through it. It's a trait that's served me well over the years. I can sleep anywhere through almost any noise. But last month, this ability started feeling more like a curse than a blessing. I live alone in a studio apartment on the 4th floor of an older building. The rent is reasonable because the place is small and the building doesn't have some of the modern amenities you'd find elsewhere, but I like the character of it. Thick walls, high ceilings, original hardwood floors that creak in all the right places. The building is secure. You need a key to get into the main entrance, and then another key for your individual apartment. My door has 2 locks. the regular handle lock and a deadbolt that I always engage before going to bed. I'm pretty religious about my nighttime routine. Check the locks, turn off all the lights, set my phone alarm, and I'm usually asleep within minutes. 3 weeks ago, I woke up and immediately knew something was wrong. It was still dark outside, probably around 5 in the morning based on the light coming through my windows. My body felt sore, like I'd been in a fight or fallen downstairs. When I sat up in bed, I realized my arms were covered in scratches. They weren't deep cuts, more like someone had dragged their fingernails across my skin with moderate pressure. The scratches ran from my wrist to my elbows on both arms in roughly parallel lines. Some were red and angry-looking, others had already started to scab over, suggesting they'd happened hours earlier. I stumbled to the bathroom to get a better look in the mirror. There were more scratches on my shoulders and upper back, following the same pattern. It looked like someone or something had grabbed me and clawed at me repeatedly. My first thought was that I'd somehow done it to myself while sleeping. I've heard of people scratching mosquito bites or eczema in their sleep until they bleed. But I don't have any skin conditions and I keep my nails trimmed short for work. Plus, the angles of some of the scratches would have been impossible for me to create myself. I checked my apartment thoroughly. Both locks were still engaged from the inside. The windows were closed and locked, and even if someone had managed to get through one of them, we're on the 4th floor with no fire escape or balcony access. There was no sign that anyone had been in my apartment. The scratches healed over the next week, but I couldn't stop thinking about how they'd gotten there. I started paying more attention to my sleep, trying to remember if I'd had any unusual dreams or if I'd felt restless during the night. Everything seemed normal. Then it happened again. 2 weeks after the first incident, I woke up with fresh scratches, this time on my legs and torso. The same parallel lines, the same moderate depth. And again, my door was locked from the inside, windows secure, no signs of intrusion. I made an appointment with my doctor, thinking maybe I had developed some kind of sleep disorder. She examined the scratches and agreed that they looked like fingernail marks, but she couldn't explain how I could have made them myself, given their location and pattern. She suggested I might want to set up a camera to record myself sleeping. The idea of filming myself while I slept felt invasive and weird, but I was desperate for answers. I borrowed a small camera from a friend and set it up on my dresser, angled toward my bed. The first few nights of recording showed exactly what I expected, me sleeping peacefully, occasionally shifting positions, but nothing out of the ordinary. On the 4th night, something different happened. Around 2 a.m., according to the timestamp, I started moving restlessly in my sleep. At first it just looked like normal tossing and turning, but then my movements became more violent. I was thrashing around, my arms flailing like I was fighting something off. The strangest part was that my eyes were closed the entire time. I was clearly still asleep, but my body was engaged in what looked like a physical struggle. I watched myself clawing at the air, my hands moving frantically around my arms and torso. That's when I was scratching myself, though I appeared to be reacting to something that wasn't there. The episode lasted about 10 minutes, then I suddenly went still and continued sleeping normally for the rest of the night. When I woke up that morning, I had fresh scratches, just like before. I showed the video to my doctor, who referred me to a sleep specialist. Apparently, what I was experiencing is called REM sleep behavior disorder, a condition where your body acts out whatever is happening in your dreams instead of remaining paralyzed like it's supposed to during REM sleep. The sleep specialist explained that people with this disorder can punch, kick, scratch, or even get up and walk around while dreaming, all without waking up. It's more common in older adults, but it can happen to anyone, especially during periods of high stress. Looking back, the timing makes sense. I'd been under a lot of pressure at work, dealing with a difficult project and an unreasonable deadline. The stress had been building for weeks before the first incident occurred. I'm on medication now that helps suppress the REM episodes, and I haven't had any more scratching incidents. But watching that video of myself fighting invisible attackers while sound asleep was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. It's strange to think that your own mind can turn against you like that, making you hurt yourself while you're completely unconscious. I still have the video saved on my computer, though I don't think I'll ever watch it again. I work in customer service for a mid-sized insurance company, which means I spend most of my day on the phone helping people with their policies and claims. It's not the most exciting job, but I'm good at it, and I've built up a reputation for being patient and helpful with difficult customers. My supervisor always tells new hires to listen to how I handle calls if they want to learn how to de-escalate situations. Our calls are recorded for quality assurance purposes, pretty standard in the industry. Usually I never think about it. The recordings are just there in case there's ever a dispute about what was said during a call, or if management wants to review someone's performance. I've been doing this job for 4 years, and I've never had any issues with my recorded calls. Last month, my supervisor Karen called me into her office after lunch. She looked uncomfortable, which was unusual because we've always had a good working relationship. She told me that she'd received a complaint from a customer about a call I'd supposedly made the previous week. According to the complaint, I'd called Mrs. Evan about her recent claim and had been incredibly rude and unprofessional. The customer said I'd used profanity, made personal attacks about her intelligence, and had basically been the opposite of helpful. She was threatening to take her business elsewhere and wanted me disciplined or fired. I was shocked. I remembered the call with Mrs. Evan. It had been routine, maybe 15 minutes discussing her fender-bender claim. She'd been pleasant, I'd been professional, and everything had gone smoothly. I told Karen there must be some mistake, that the customer was either confused about who she'd spoken with or was making false accusations. Karen said she'd pulled the recording to review it before our meeting. She played it for me and I felt like I was losing my mind. It was definitely my voice on the recording. Same accent, same speech patterns, even the same little quirks I have when I'm talking on the phone. But the words coming out of my mouth were horrible. I was calling Mrs. Evan stupid, telling her that her claim was probably fraudulent, using language that would get anyone fired immediately. The thing is, I have no memory of saying any of those things, none. I remember the call being completely normal and professional. But there was my voice, clear as day, being cruel and unprofessional to a customer. Karen was as confused as I was. She'd worked with me for years and knew this behavior was completely out of character. But she couldn't ignore the recording. It was clear evidence of misconduct. She said she'd have to write me up and that I'd be on probation for the next 90 days. I went home that night feeling like I was going crazy. How could I have said those things and not remembered? Was I having some kind of mental breakdown? Had the stress of the job finally gotten to me in ways I wasn't aware of? I decided to request copies of all my recorded calls from the past month. It took some convincing, but Karen eventually agreed to let me review them, thinking it might help us figure out what was going on. Out of about 60 calls I'd made that month, 3 of them contained similar incidents. In each case, I could clearly hear my voice saying things that were completely inappropriate and unprofessional. And in each case, I had absolutely no memory of saying those things. I remembered the calls, but I remembered them going very differently. The pattern was strange, too. The inappropriate comments always happened during a specific part of each call, usually when I was putting the customer on hold to look up information. On the recordings, instead of the hold music that should have been playing, you could hear me making these terrible comments as if I was still talking to the customer. That's when I started to suspect that something technical was wrong. I asked our IT department to look into it, but they insisted that our phone system was working normally and that there was no way the recordings could have been altered or corrupted. I was about to give up and accept that I was somehow losing my mind when I remembered something. My neighbor works in audio production for a local radio station, and he's always talking about digital audio editing and how sophisticated the technology has become. I brought the recordings to him, and he spent an evening analyzing them with professional software. What he found was disturbing but also vindicating. The recordings had been digitally altered. Someone had taken samples of my voice from legitimate calls and used AI software to generate new speech, then spliced it into the existing recordings. The manipulation was incredibly sophisticated, good enough to fool casual listening, but detectable with the right tools and expertise. Whoever did it had access to hours of my recorded calls to use as source material, and they knew enough about our phone system to edit the recordings in our database. We took this evidence to Karen and then to upper management. The investigation revealed that someone in our IT department had been selling customer information to competitors and had been covering their tracks by creating fake misconduct recordings to discredit employees who might have noticed irregularities. The whole scheme came crashing down once they started looking closely. 3 people were fired, and the company had to implement new security measures for their recorded calls. I was cleared of all misconduct and received a formal apology, but the experience left me shaken. For weeks, I'd questioned my own sanity, wondering if I was capable of saying cruel things to customers and then forgetting about it. The fact that technology could be used to make me doubt my own memory was terrifying. Now, I'm much more skeptical when I hear recordings of people saying controversial things. If someone could do this to me in a small insurance office, imagine what could be done with enough resources and motivation. The technology is only going to get better, and I'm not sure most people would know how to spot the manipulation. I still work in customer service, but I'm much more aware of how my calls are being recorded and stored. And I've learned never to trust audio evidence completely, no matter how convincing it sounds. I'm pretty much a homebody. After working all day at the bank, dealing with customers and paperwork, I usually just want to come home, order takeout, and binge-watch Netflix until I fall asleep on the couch. My friends are always trying to get me to go out more, but honestly, I'm perfectly content with my quiet evenings at home. My routine is pretty predictable. I get home around 6, change into comfortable clothes, and decide what I want for dinner. Usually it's Thai food from the place down the street or pizza if I'm feeling indulgent. I'll eat while catching up on whatever show I'm currently obsessed with, then maybe read for a while before bed. 2 weeks ago, I was having one of these typical evenings. I'd ordered pad thai and was about halfway through the second episode of a true crime documentary when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message said, "Enjoying your dinner? That pad thai smells amazing from here." My first thought was that it was probably a wrong number, maybe someone trying to text their roommate or partner. I didn't respond and went back to my show. But something about the message bothered me. How did they know I was eating pad thai? About an hour later, another text came through from the same number. "You should close your living room curtains. Anyone walking by can see right in." That's when I started to feel uneasy. I looked toward my front windows and realized the person was right. I hadn't closed the curtains when I got home, and with the lights on inside, anyone outside could probably see me sitting on my couch. But my apartment is on the second floor, and you'd have to be standing in a very specific spot in the parking lot to get a clear view inside. I got up and closed the curtains, my hands shaking slightly as I did it. Then I texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Just someone who cares about your safety. You really should be more careful." I spent the next few minutes debating whether to call the police. Was this actually threatening or just someone being creepy? The messages weren't explicitly menacing, but they clearly indicated that someone was watching me, which was terrifying enough. Before I could decide what to do, another text arrived. "You bite your nails when you're nervous. You're doing it right now." I looked down at my hands and realized I was, in fact, biting my nails, something I do unconsciously when I'm stressed. That's when the full horror of the situation hit me. Someone was watching me closely enough to see my nervous habits in real time. I immediately called 911. The dispatcher took my information and said they'd send an officer to check the area around my building. While I waited, I turned off all the lights in my apartment and tried to stay away from the windows. The officer who responded was thorough and professional. He walked around the entire building, checked the parking lot and nearby areas, but didn't find anyone suspicious. He said it was possible someone had been there earlier and left when I closed the curtains, or that they were watching from a distance with binoculars. He suggested I document all the messages and report them to my phone carrier. He also recommended that I install better window coverings and consider getting a security system if I continued to feel unsafe. After the officer left, I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But the next evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I received another text. "The police didn't find me because I'm very good at staying hidden. Sweet dreams." This time I didn't hesitate to call the police again. The same officer came out and we went through the same process of searching the area with the same results. He filed a report for stalking and harassment, but explained that without more concrete evidence or escalation, there wasn't much they could do legally. I barely slept that night. Every sound from outside made me jump, and I kept checking my phone to see if more messages had come through. I'd never realized how vulnerable I felt in my own home until someone made it clear they could watch me whenever they wanted. The messages continued sporadically over the next week. Sometimes they'd comment on what I was wearing or what I was watching on TV or what time I went to bed. Always from different phone numbers, always showing that someone was observing my daily routine closely. I ended up staying with my sister for a few days while I figured out what to do. When I finally came back to my apartment, I'd installed blackout curtains in every room, bought a security camera for my front door, and changed my routine completely. I started varying my schedule, eating at different times, watching TV in my bedroom instead of the living room. The strangest part is that the messages stopped as soon as I changed my behavior. It's been over a week now with no contact from my stalker. Part of me wonders if they got bored once I became less predictable, or if they moved on to someone else who was easier to watch. I still don't know who was sending those messages or how long they'd been watching me before they started texting. The thought that someone might have been observing my routine for weeks or months without me knowing is almost worse than the messages themselves. I've become much more paranoid about my privacy. I check my surroundings more carefully when I come home. I keep my curtains closed even during the day, and I've started using different entrances to my building to make it harder for someone to predict my movements. The police never found who was responsible, and the phone numbers they used were all from disposable phones that couldn't be traced. I've accepted that I'll probably never know who it was or what they wanted, but I've learned to be more aware of how visible my private life is to anyone who wants to watch. Most of us go through our daily routines without thinking about who might be observing us, but sometimes someone is paying very close attention indeed. My brother Braxton and I weren't particularly close as adults. We'd grown up together, shared a room until I left for college, but like a lot of siblings, we drifted apart as we got older. Different interests, different cities, different lives. We'd text on birthdays and holidays, maybe see each other at family gatherings, but we weren't the type of brothers who talked regularly or shared personal details about our lives. Braxton worked construction and had struggled with alcohol for most of his 20s. He'd gotten sober about 3 years ago and seemed to be doing better, steady job, his own apartment, talking about maybe going back to school. But he was still pretty isolated, didn't have many close friends, and our family had learned not to push too hard when he seemed to be pulling away. 6 weeks ago, my mom called to tell me Braxton had been found dead in his apartment. Apparent overdose, though whether it was intentional or accidental was unclear. He'd been dead for 2 days before his landlord found him when he didn't show up for work. It was devastating news, made worse by the fact that none of us had spoken to him in over a month. The funeral was small, just family and a few coworkers. I gave a eulogy that felt inadequate, talking about memories from when we were kids because I didn't know enough about his adult life to say much else. It was one of those situations where you realize how much you don't know about someone you thought you knew. After the funeral, I went back to my routine, trying to process the grief while handling all the practical stuff that comes with losing a family member. Braxton hadn't left much behind: some furniture, clothes, a few personal items that my parents sorted through. His phone had been damaged and couldn't be recovered, which meant we lost any photos or messages that might have given us insight into his final weeks. 2 weeks after Braxton died, I got a voicemail from his number. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a missed call notification. When I saw Braxton's name on the screen, my first thought was that someone else must be using his phone, maybe someone from his work calling to discuss final paychecks or something administrative. But when I listened to the voicemail, it was definitely Braxton's voice. He sounded tired, maybe a little drunk, and he was rambling about wanting to apologize for being distant lately. He said he knew he hadn't been a good brother, that he'd been dealing with some stuff and hadn't known how to reach out for help. The message was about 2 minutes long, and it sounded exactly like the kind of call Braxton might have made during one of his low periods. Except he'd been dead for 2 weeks. I called the number back immediately, but it went straight to an automated message saying the line had been disconnected. I tried several more times with the same result. I called my mom to ask if she knew anything about Braxton's phone or if someone might have access to it. She was as confused as I was and confirmed that the phone had been destroyed in whatever accident or incident led to his death. The police had told us it couldn't be recovered. Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize the voicemail. Maybe it was an old message that had somehow been delayed in the phone system. Maybe someone was playing a cruel prank, though I couldn't imagine who would do such a thing or how they would have gotten a recording of Braxton's voice. Then I got another one. This time Braxton sounded more coherent, more like himself. He was talking about wanting to get together soon, maybe grab dinner and catch up properly. He mentioned specific things, a restaurant we'd talked about trying months ago, a movie he thought I'd like. It was the kind of casual, brotherly conversation we'd never actually had, but always thought we might someday. The voicemails kept coming, maybe once or twice a week. Always from Braxton's disconnected number, always in his voice, always saying things that sounded like him but were somehow off. Sometimes he'd reference conversations we'd never had, or mention plans we'd never made. Other times he'd apologize for things that had never happened, or promise to change behaviors that hadn't been problems. I started saving the voicemails, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I thought they were somehow real, like Braxton was trying to communicate from wherever he'd gone. More likely, I just wasn't ready to let go of his voice, even if hearing it was making me question my sanity. The strangest voicemail came about a month after the first one. Braxton sounded different, more serious, almost urgent. He said he needed to tell me something important, that he'd figured out what had really happened to him, but the message cut off abruptly after about 30 seconds. That's when I finally decided to take the voicemails to someone who might be able to explain them. A friend of mine works in telecommunications and owes me a favor, so I asked if he could analyze the audio files to determine where they were coming from. What he found was both disappointing and disturbing. The voicemails were being generated using AI voice synthesis software, created from samples of Braxton's speech that had been recorded from various sources, probably social media videos, voicemails he'd left for other people, maybe even conversations that had been recorded without his knowledge. Someone had collected enough audio of Braxton speaking to train an AI to replicate his voice convincingly, then was using that technology to generate fake voicemails and send them to me from spoofed phone numbers. The technical explanation made sense, but it raised even more disturbing questions. Who was doing this and why? How had they gotten access to recordings of Braxton's voice? What was the point of making me think my dead brother was trying to contact me? I never found answers to those questions. The voicemails stopped coming after I had them analyzed, like whoever was responsible somehow knew I'd figured out the trick. I still have all the recordings saved on my phone, though I rarely listen to them anymore. The whole experience made me think about how technology can be used to manipulate grief and hope. For weeks, I'd been clinging to the possibility that Braxton was somehow still trying to communicate with me, that death wasn't as final as I'd thought. Learning that it was all artificial was devastating in a completely different way. I don't know if this was someone's idea of a prank, or if they thought they were somehow helping me process my grief, or if there was some other motive I can't understand. But hearing my brother's voice saying things he never said, making promises he couldn't keep, was crueler than just letting him stay dead. I drive for a rideshare company on weekends to make some extra money. The regular pay isn't great, but weekend nights can be pretty lucrative, especially when you're willing to work the late shifts picking up people from bars and clubs. I've been doing it for about 2 years now, and I've gotten used to dealing with drunk passengers, navigating unfamiliar neighborhoods, and staying alert during long nights behind the wheel. I installed a dash cam about 6 months ago after another driver told me about a passenger who had falsely accused him of taking a longer route to inflate the fare. The camera faces forward and records everything that happens in front of my car, plus it has a smaller camera that shows the interior. It's been useful for documenting a few minor accidents and keeping records of pickup and drop-off locations. Last Saturday night was busy but fairly typical. I started around 8 p.m. and worked until about 3 in the morning, mostly doing runs between downtown and the suburbs. College kids going to parties, couples heading home from dinner, the usual weekend crowd. I'd probably made 15 or 20 trips by the time I decided to call it a night. Sunday afternoon, I was going through my dashcam footage to clear some storage space when I noticed something odd in one of the videos from the previous evening. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., and I was driving through a residential area I didn't immediately recognize, though that's not unusual since I rely on GPS to navigate most of the time. What caught my attention was that there was a passenger in my back seat, a woman, probably in her 30s, with long dark hair. She appeared to be unconscious or asleep, slumped against the door with her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Here's the problem: I have no memory of picking up this passenger. None whatsoever. I checked my rideshare app history for that night, looking at all the trips I'd logged. According to the app, I hadn't picked anyone up between 11:15 p.m. and 12:20 a.m. There was a 65-minute gap in my recorded trips. But the dashcam clearly showed me driving with a passenger during that exact time period. I watched the footage more carefully, trying to piece together what had happened. The video showed me driving for about 12 minutes through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, making several turns, eventually stopping in what looked like an apartment complex parking lot. The interior camera showed the woman remaining motionless in the back seat the entire time. When I reached the parking lot, the footage showed me getting out of the car and opening the rear door. I helped the woman out. She was awake but seemed disoriented and unsteady on her feet. I walked with her toward one of the apartment buildings, supporting her weight as she leaned heavily against me. The strangest part was watching myself on camera. My movements looked mechanical, almost robotic. I wasn't talking to the passenger or showing any of the normal concern you'd expect when helping someone who was clearly in distress. I just methodically assisted her to the building entrance and then returned to my car. I fast-forwarded through the rest of the footage from that night, but there was nothing else unusual. After the apartment complex, I apparently drove straight home and ended my shift, which matched my memory of how the evening concluded. I spent the rest of Sunday trying to figure out what had happened during those missing 65 minutes. I retraced the route shown in the dashcam footage, driving back to the residential area and the apartment complex. Everything looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was seeing it all for the first time. The apartment complex was called Meridian Gardens, and it looked like the kind of place where young professionals or college students might live. I sat in the parking lot for a while, hoping something would trigger my memory, but nothing came back to me. I considered going to the leasing office to ask if anyone knew about a woman matching the description from my footage, but I realized how crazy that would sound. What was I supposed to say? That I'd apparently given someone a ride, but couldn't remember doing it? The more I thought about it, the more disturbing possibilities occurred to me. Had I been drugged somehow? Was this some kind of blackout episode? Had I been drinking without realizing it, though I never drink when I'm driving for work? I made an appointment with my doctor and explained what had happened. She ran some tests but couldn't find anything unusual in my blood work. She suggested that I might have experienced a dissociative episode, possibly triggered by stress or fatigue. Apparently, it's possible for people to perform complex tasks while in a dissociative state with no memory of their actions afterward. But that explanation didn't satisfy me. I'd been driving for rideshare companies for 2 years without any similar incidents. I don't have a history of mental health issues or memory problems. And the woman in my back seat? Who was she, and how had she ended up in my car? I spent the next few days obsessing over the footage, watching it frame by frame, trying to extract any detail that might help me understand what had happened. I noticed that the woman was wearing what looked like a hospital bracelet on her wrist, though I couldn't make out any text on it from the video quality. That detail led me to a disturbing new theory. What if the woman had been a patient somewhere, possibly sedated or under the influence of medication? What if I'd somehow been involved in helping her leave a medical facility without proper discharge? I called the police non-emergency line and tried to explain the situation. The officer I spoke with was polite but clearly skeptical. Without evidence of a crime or a missing person report, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I contact the rideshare company to see if they had any record of additional trips that night. The rideshare company was even less helpful. Their customer service representatives insisted that their app data was accurate and that I hadn't made any trips during the time period in question. When I mentioned the dashcam footage, they said they couldn't access or verify external recordings. I've watched that 12-minute video dozens of times now, and I still have no memory of any of it happening. It's like watching a stranger who happens to look exactly like me, driving my car, helping a woman I've never seen before. The incident has made me question everything about that night and about my own mind. If I can't trust my memory about something as significant as picking up a passenger, what else might I be forgetting? How many other gaps might there be in my recollection that I haven't noticed because they weren't captured on camera? I've stopped driving for the rideshare company, at least temporarily. The thought of getting behind the wheel and potentially having another blackout episode is terrifying. What if next time I hurt someone or myself and have no memory of it? I still have the dashcam footage saved on my computer. Sometimes I watch it late at night, hoping that familiarity will eventually trigger some memory of what happened. But so far, those 12 minutes remain completely blank in my mind, like they happened to someone else entirely. The woman in the video haunts me most of all. I hope she made it safely to wherever she was going, and that whatever was wrong with her that night was resolved. But I can't shake the feeling that I was involved in something I don't understand, something that my own mind has hidden from me for reasons I can't comprehend.